Hello, welcome back to Crackin' Mirrors with K-Man, that's me. Today I am going to finally make something make sense for you. And if you've been struggling with 3D modeling for a while, this might be part of the reason why. It was for me a long time, longer than I'd like to admit, but I'd like to finally explain this senior level concept that nobody ever shows beginners. So, without further ado, I'm gonna get started, and I hope you'll stick around because I'm about to change your life. So, let's make things clear in Blender. Most beginners, they think smoothing is a visual preference, okay? But, like Optimus Prime said, there's more that meets the eye. It's really about math. So, smoothing is math, and using the wrong smoothing mode will cause problems when you bake. So taking your high poly and basically stamping it onto your low poly, so the low poly gets the high poly detail without having all the extra faces and vertices that'll bog down the game engine. So smoothing is math, and you never want to use any shading modifiers on the high poly, ever. Only on the low poly. So, for example, I'll talk about it, but things like weighted normals, you never want to use weighted normals in a high poly. Things like marking edges sharp, so if I come over here, for example, and let's just say, so don't do this, because this is my high poly, right? But let's just say I wanted to go into this tank turret, and I wanted to click a couple edges, right? And I wanted to go to Control E, to bring up the menu, mark sharp, don't ever do that. Never on a high poly do you want to do that. You don't want to change the shading like that. That's only for the low poly, and I'll explain why later. Well, before you can understand exactly what I'm talking about, you need to understand something called normals. So, I made a really clear LinkedIn post, but it doesn't have a visual. So I'm going to show you visually what that LinkedIn post is actually saying. So if I pull up my LinkedIn real quick, you can see that this highlighted part, this is the important thing that I'm going to explain visually. So I said the high poly object is about curvature and silhouette of your model. True. The low poly object is the one that you use auto smooth on to mark edges as sharp or soft. True. Very important. But it doesn't mean anything, me saying this, if you don't understand how the viewport shading actually works. And to know how it actually works, think of how a light works on paper, right? So, imagine you're holding a piece of paper, or you set a piece of paper on the ground, it's flat. You take just a standard light, and you shine that light on the paper, right? You hold it, I don't know, maybe 3 inches off the paper, right? And it leaves a distinct circle. Okay, so if you take that same light, and you fold that piece of paper around like a tube, and you put the same piece of paper on the ground, right? But this time it's folded, not flat. And you put it 3 inches from that paper where like you would be touching the paper with the light, right? You'll notice something. It starts to bend and it starts to distort, it starts to become more smooth. It's more of a faded look, right? It's not just a solid circle anymore. It has more of like shading and like it fades out around the edges. That is exactly the concept of how normals work. I hope this makes sense. I tried to explain it the most visual example I could, because to me when I think of that, it's like, okay, I see how this works, and now let me show you what it means if I go to make something. Okay. So we have a cylinder, and we have 16 pieces, correct? Well, you can see all these squares, or rectangles, that make up this cylinder. Well, if we go to Shade Smooth, and we go to, where'd it go? Shade Smooth. You have to be in object mode. Okay, so the shade smooth, like this, you see how it starts to fade, and you see how I was talking about that light? It starts out like hard here where we're looking at, but then it gets softer. It's like a little gradient, if you can tell that it gets softer and softer, right? So the same kind of thing, if I were to go here, and I were to do Control B to bevel it, right? So you can tell something. You see this? This is what eventually the final is going to have something called auto smooth, right? So auto smooth is going to go on your final, and you're going to be able to see, oh, this looks crisp, right? Well, what if I do this? What if I undo that, right? I go back here and I do Control B again, and I add like more of these, right? Now what happens? It's even smoother, as if we were bending the paper. You see I'm getting at now? So, you have the harsh circle or you have the softer spread out. This is the light hitting it a different way. This is exactly how normals work. So, if I were going to try to explain normals, like from a visual standpoint right here, you would have a line coming out here, you would have a line coming out here, you would have a line coming toward you at an angle here. So it's perpendicular to the face. So like an exact intersection. That's what normals do. And that's why when you shade something smooth and curve it, it makes the light bend and not look as harsh. Okay, are you with me so far? Good. And if you guys have any questions in the comments, feel free to ask. I am trying to make this video to really help 3D artists, especially like myself who are struggling for this concept the longest time, and just struggling in general. This finally made things click for me to where everything started to come to me clearer, because I understood the fundamental principle of how the shading worked. And it's very important. Okay, so I went over the paper analogy. I talked about how the light becomes less harsh as you smooth it out. Okay, perfect. So, I'm going to say this, I'm going to preface right now, and then I'll explain it. On your final mesh, you always are going to use, for the low poly, you are always, write it down, say it 10 times, always use auto smooth. In Blender at least, you're going to use what's called shade auto smooth. And this will set an angle for you. Green triangle. These are your mesh properties. So, auto smooth, off, on, off. See how it looks kind of like rough? Turn it on, looks crisp. Turn it off, wow, where'd the edge go? It's still there, but it doesn't look like it's there. Turn it back on, and it's crisp. Now you can kind of see the difference. So, the only exception when you're not going to use auto smooth is if you want the final look to be blocky, like so. So I'll show you an example. If you're trying to go for like a Gunfire Reborn kind of look, if you've played that game, and you want like a gun or a sword or something to be blocky at the end. So now that we got that out of the way, let's explain the 3 ways you are going to use high poly smoothing depending on what method you're going with. So now that we understand the basics, let's do this. Come on, we got this, guys. You are gonna thank me later. Hell, you might thank me right after this video if it clicks. Because that's exactly what happened for me, and I was so relieved. So let's go back to the actual model now. And is there any way I can get rid of this stuff? Okay. GX, let's just move that over. We don't need this anymore. GX. Okay, cool. So now, we are assuming that we are doing a high and low poly model. So this, if I show you everything, you're going to see there's some pieces that have a lot. All this black, this is all geo. This is a sculpted piece. I'm going to have to rework it, but it's alright. I understand what I did wrong. But you don't need to worry about that for this video. First, we're going to go over sub D, okay? So, the sub D workflow. I don't use it that much, but I want to explain how it works for you. This is basically the sub D workflow. So each of these edges you take are going to... So in sub D, each of your edges, right? So like, you want to have what's called control edges. So it keeps things like rounded or sharp. So let me explain. So right here, did you see what it looked like before? Now look at it, it's more crisp, right? If I'm gonna extrude, for example, right? Now, sorry, this is on auto smooth, so we're gonna go to smooth. Wow, that looks freaking ugly, right? Why does it look ugly? Because we don't have enough control loops, or control edges, which are apparently different than support loops. That's for a different method. So this is called a control loop, okay? Think of this as you're controlling how close the edge is, how crisp it is. So, because I put this here and that here, now it's crisper. And if I were to subdivide all this, if I can even do that, if if I were to subdivide this, it would be smoother. And the more you subdivide it, the smoother it'll be. I mean, in reality, I should have started out this object different, but the more you smooth it, so if I show a mesh and I show, let's say, I'll show it with a cube because it'll make even more sense. If we bevel it, you can see it's more rounded, right? And I can try to make another video on sub-D modeling, but this is why I don't really use sub-D modeling unless it's like a cylinder, because weird shapes like this, okay? So I'm gonna go to the next kind of modeling. And for this sub-D modeling, you would use shade auto smooth just like the others for the low poly. This is a high poly. Alright, let's go to my favorite workflow. This is one I'm kind of developing. It's kind of like a hybrid workflow that I'm creating myself that I'm hoping other hard surface artists will find useful. So let's duplicate, let's go to this gun, right? And let's say I'm ready for my low poly model. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna say, so this is shade flat right now, right? Shade flat. This is what it looks like. Doesn't look bad. Honestly, this is pretty good. But I'm gonna go to shade auto smooth. Huh. You notice what happened, right? We lost those hard edges. Do we want to? Probably for the end. Yeah, we probably do. So it might already be kind of good for what we want. This is actually probably how I'm gonna do it, except for one thing in the end. I want a couple things to be defined. So this is where you're allowed to mark hard edges, okay? So this is called marking an edge hard. You go around here, right? And you see what it looks like right now, okay? See how it looks kind of smooth? And this might not change it as much, but let's just see. If I go to mark hard, not mark seam, that's later. Mark sharp, not hard, mark sharp. You see how it gets a little more crisp, right? And it's like, I kind of want this like edge definition back. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna go to these edges, I'm gonna go here, and I'm gonna mark sharp. So, Control E, mark sharp. And now you see we have some crispness back, and it's a little bit of a balancing game. But I think you're kind of seeing what I'm saying. So this marks sharp right here, right? So I want this to be sharp so it's not so like smooth, right? So this looks kind of smooth. It looks somewhat sharp, but I want it to really define this edge. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go here, we're gonna do Control E, we're gonna mark sharp, and now it's even crisper. And you will use what's called, maybe that's part of the reason, because I haven't applied the modifier. I didn't want to get too technical yet, but this is what the end is going to be in this. So you're going to use weighted normals on your lows. Okay, so this is what I expected. So this is what it's going to be. And then you can change the weight until it looks how you want it. So you can see what it's doing. It's making it more or less crisp. You can change the threshold, and I will find some settings that work another time. But I believe you also put on keep sharp. I'll figure that out real quick after this video, but yeah. Okay, so you keep sharp. And honestly, this looks good. Like, this is almost ready to go. And now that I have the weighted normals and I see this like harsh line, I would probably, no wait, don't keep sharp, because you want to mark all the sharp edges. So I think this will drive it home. Take this, take that, get here, and let's see if I can show you this now. Control E, mark sharp. Okay, maybe that makes more sense now. You can kind of see how it looks now, how it's like smoother or not. I'll have to show a better visual, but the important thing is, for this method, right, and this is for non-sculpted piece, right, this is called the Boolean bevel workflow. You want to take your high poly piece, duplicate it, right, and you want your low poly to have auto smooth. not flat like it had, okay? This is what flat looks like. You don't, like, obviously this should be like this. Now you see how it changes, how like blocky it is? Auto smooth. That looks a lot better. Unless you're going for that blocky on purpose look, then you can just use the blockiness. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, let's go to my other piece that has a sculpt on it. So let's say something like, let's just use this for example, I guess, or actually let's use, yeah, let's just use this, GC. Okay, let's just use this real quick. So this, the low, is gonna look like this. For one, it's not gonna be like that much. I'm going to probably use the original piece, right? So this is high poly. Oops, high poly. I'll probably use the, let's actually delete that. I will use the low poly. So this is high poly. Let me go to the low poly. Show you the difference. Tank, high poly. Okay, now I'm blind because I can't see the word low poly for some reason. High poly, high. This is the point where I freak out because I can't find low poly. Oh, because I don't have the low poly yet. Okay, sorry. I was freaking out for a second. I don't have my low poly yet. So I'm gonna go to the tank high, and you can see this isn't as like dented up and beat up. So we're gonna G, Y, Y, G, Y. Okay, move it down, G, Z. I'm just gonna show you. So this right here, this is what the low poly will be, and you can see it looks a little blocky, right? So pretend you've already sculpted the high poly, like I showed you, that was dented and it looked proper. And why is this? Oh, whatever. I'm just gonna undo it. But anyway, so you're gonna take the edges you want, like this. You're gonna take this, and you're gonna mark it hard. So Control E, mark sharp, right? But and make sure I'm auto smooth. Yep. So I just did auto smooth. So this is nice and smooth now, but you still have that crisp edge here if you want. If you don't want that, so that right there. So even if your high poly sculpt, this is called tank high, but it's not as high as. This is like the high before sculpt. So I duplicated it so I could sculpt. All right. So this piece right here, even if it's high, right? Shift D, G, C. Okay. You can see this right here. Even if this is high, you can still shape. This should be smooth. Yep, it is smooth. Okay. But you can still shape the low to have influence. So if this was like the high was too soft, right? So say this edge right here was just all one, like this face is all one, and you didn't want that, and you wanted it to look like it does now. On the low poly, you could do what we just said, and you can mark this sharp, you can mark this part sharp, mark it sharp over here, and you don't want this sharp, you can mark this smooth. So pretend there was a line here for the low poly, you could mark that smooth. And I usually just leave it on angle 30 degrees in the settings when I do the auto smooth, right? But you don't want to auto smooth the actual sculpted piece. Okay, so I hope this makes sense. And if you have to watch this a couple times, or I need to make like a shorter version of this, please let me know. I really do want this to make sense for people. It really gave me some serious heartaches. A lot more than I'd like to admit. So please tell me if this doesn't make sense to you. So I duplicated that so I can just delete that. So now, I said your low is always going to be auto smooth, correct? Unless you're purposely doing like a gunfire rebore and everything's triangulated, everything is blocky looking in the end. And that's a stylistic choice. But now what I want to explain is what actually gets exported when you export something to Substance Painter or Unreal Engine or any game engine, right? So you take your low poly, for example, pretend this is my low poly, and the low poly is what you're actually exporting. And the low poly's properties, which is why we use auto smooth. So auto smooth, right? Auto smooth here is what is actually going to get exported as the model to the final software engine. So Substance or Unreal. But if it has like extra detail and stuff, that like sculpted piece will get its detail transferred to the low poly, right? So what's really nice about my workflow for this high poly tank that I'm developing is I can make all the pieces that aren't sculpted, they can all stay high. It doesn't matter how blocky it looks in this, because this high poly is only caring about the curvature. So like, for example, perfect example right here, it doesn't matter, this is faceted. This isn't what the final look is gonna be. And if I sculpt it, it definitely doesn't, like, it'll already be smooth. And that look will get transferred onto the high poly. So obviously it wouldn't be this piece, it would be this piece, just to make it make sense. Okay, so we're looking at the same piece. So we have this piece, right? We have this piece. So my shade smooth, this is what it would actually look like. And it's like, man, I don't want this to be like that. So I think I can clear sharp. No, okay, I can't clear the sharp because of the smoothing angle that it's at, right? So if I put it at a lower smoothing angle, it'll keep more blockiness. If I put it at a higher smoothing angle, it's gonna lose a little more form, but I can have a little more control to shape it manually. So let me show you what I mean. So if I have this and I have, let's just go 30, whatever, 36. Now you see you lost it. But it's like, oh no, what do I do? Well, you can come here and you can start shaping it manually. So I can do Control E, mark sharp. And now I get that hard edge back. And it does take more manual cleanup, but you get more control. So it's kind of a, what do you want? Do you want more control or do you want it to work quicker? So Control E, for example, I could do that, mark sharp, and I can start shaping it. And you can see how I get that form back. So you can see this side versus this side. This is the principle of how this stuff actually works and the stuff that nobody ever explains. Only the seniors understand all this stuff I'm explaining. And they never really explain it all. They never explain what shading styles actually do. They're just an overlay. This right here, this is just an overlay. The final look is gonna come, in the sculpted pieces, yeah, they're gonna have the dents, it's gonna inform that. But the actual curvature of the edge, like how rough or how sharp it is going to come from, and ignore these extra edges, these are obviously bad and I need to go back and fix them. But anyway, hopefully this makes more sense. You can see the edges here, you can see the sharp edge, and you can see how we started out was like this. So you're going to manually be able to shape it how you want for the final look of the model. And say this had some dents on it, right? Say I had like a big dent right here on the side. This is just the curvature, right? So this just shows the form of the shape, the silhouette, they call it. I would still be able to have that dent in here, but I would just be able to control how smooth the silhouette is. So I have sharpness here, I have smooth here, and this is a perfect example of the normals. You see how this is kind of fading out? If I were to take this and I were to get rid of, say, these edges, you can see it's a sharper edge. This is like the light right on the paper, right? Without the bend. And this is what it's like when you hold it above the paper. You can see it's a smoother gradient. It's all about that gradient. That's what controls how smooth or sharp something looks. And sharpness basically has like a complete sharp edge, basically has no gradient. It's just sharp. But you can see there is like a different gray look here than there is here with how the light's hitting it. And this line looks harsher than this line. Well, if I don't want that, I can do this. Mark sharp. And now this has that more edged look, right? More segmented. So you can shape it how you want. You can do a combination. You can make most of it smooth, most of it sharp, however you want the final look to be. But for a machined, stylized piece like this, something like this is probably something I would go with, right? So I'd have this piece, I'd have an edge, and I'd probably keep this smooth, and I might harden something like this for the example. Sharp, or not harden, sharp, sorry. I keep saying harden. I mean sharp, not harden. I think that's my term. If I want it to be like, you see how this is kind of smooth? If I want this to be sharp, I can tell it be more sharp. And then it'll be more of a harsh edge. And if I undo that, you can see, now you can't there, because this edge is influencing the overall of this one. So they all kind of balance out each other. So it's kind of like a blend. So if you tell this one to be sharp, you can see that this is not as sharp, but it's already kind of sharp because of how this is going off the corner. If this wasn't sharp and this wasn't sharp, I can show a good example of like how you can really shape this. So if I clear sharp, you can see this is sharp still, but now this doesn't have a separate edge. It's just one kind of continuous thing. This is what normals are, this is how they affect your model, and this is how shading actually matters in your model. So, rule of thumb, the low, unless you're doing a purposely blocky look, always auto smooth. Every single time. Write it on a piece of paper, say it out loud 10 times so you don't forget that. That'll save you a headache. For sub D, you always want to use the support loops I was showing you about like the cylinder, right? To make it more rounded or more harsh. And you always want to use shade smooth. Always shade smooth on sub D, not auto smooth. Not auto smooth. Okay? Good. Alright. And then for the method I was doing, my favorite method is going to be flat, unless it's sculpted, you're going to use smooth. But for all the other pieces, if you're not sculpting anything and you're just making shapes, flat on the high, auto smooth on the low. Okay? Flat on the high, auto smooth on the low. Say it, write it down, remember it. It'll save you a lot of headache. Okay? So once we actually make our model, what does it mean when we go to export it? Because, that's the important part, because that's where we actually get to do the next step of painting it and then bring it into the game engine. Or if you want to rig it before then, before the game engine. But here's what we do. So say, first off, I'm going to delete these edges and pretend I was going to export this. Right? So let's... Because I did say the mesh, the actual object that gets exported, the actual geometry is going to be this piece, the low. So I'm going to delete these edges because they're just stray edges, and I guess it just happens sometimes. Not a big deal. We just delete them, right? Oh, and one more important thing I meant to mention. Any sculpted piece has to be a closed mesh. Even if you're not seeing, like, the bottom here, for example. If this was hidden because it was on top of something and you never see it, you can't sculpt on a mesh that's open. Okay? So that's one other thing I meant to mention that I forgot. You cannot sculpt on an open mesh. It has to be fully closed, or you will get shading issues, you will get baking issues, and it won't look great. And you'll be kicking yourself in the foot, having to do it over. So, now, say this is what I want to export, right? And let's just pretend this part was already the same. And if you want, I can symmetrize it to make it easy. Do this, I can do that. I can do symmetry. Let's just pretend this is what I want to file. So I go to File, and I will go to Export. I usually just use FBX, right? Now, what does all this mean? You want selected objects. I mean, that's all that really matters. You want selected objects, you want mesh. Scale is 1. Don't have to worry about that yet. You do want the modifier, because it's not actually going to apply it in Blender. It's only going to apply it in Substance, so you can actually have the proper look. So smoothing, normals only, or faces. Either is fine. I'm just going to keep it on the default. So this is the high-level stuff that doesn't really get explained of how smoothing actually works. And I'd like to show you a bonus tip for sticking around this long that'll make it so you don't have to use multiple materials. Because in reality, you're only supposed to use one material slot. You're only supposed to use one material slot per object. Alright? That's the pro level workflow. That's how you get it to work properly in Substance. You don't take it and paint it with 100 different colors. You don't put like 12 colors if you want different faces to be different colors. That's not how it works. That's what a lot of people think, and that's what a lot of people do, and I guess that's fine if you're only using it in Blender, but if you want to bring it into another software, that's not what you do. You use one material slot. So it would be like all red, all blue, whatever. In this case, all gray. So a really neat trick I'd like to show you is, how did I get this to color? You'll notice there's no material on it. So how did I do it? Well, if you come here to viewport shape. Okay, this orange icon. Viewport display in object mode, right? Because I don't think it works. Oh, I guess it does work in edit mode. So either you can change this color, right? So say I have my high poly piece that's whatchamacallit, and if you really want, you can actually, which is really nice, I found out, you can make it see-through if you want a little bit too, without having to use X-ray mode. You can actually just make it see-through to help you overlay it on top of an object. So for example, you take this, right? Shift D, right click. We're going to pretend this is the shade flat, right? And we're going to make this one, change the alpha, let's make this one red. And I'm going to use red and blue just so if someone's colorblind, they can see it easily, not red and green. So, color example, the first one we're going to make blue, right? So, blue. Okay, so you see how these are two different colors? Wow, but look, no material. We don't even have to have any material on it. We can see different colors. And this right here can help us check our cages for baking, if they're proper or not. So they're right on top of each other right now, right? But what I can do is I can go to the color example, I can go to here, I can make it completely like that, right? And then another way you can do it is you can go to object, so they are object, you can do single, you can do random, so each one would be a different color if you had a different single color for each high and low. But I like to just do it on object and use this mode right here. It makes all the difference. Why complicate it when you can just do this? You can have whatever color you want. It should be working. I don't know why it's not. It works fine. I should be. So this is what I'm trying to show. But you want your high and low to be as close to each other as possible. But if you were doing, for example, let's see if I can show this real quick. If I were trying to make this wait, this isn't shade flat. Okay, so pretend red is shade flat, blue is shade smooth. Or I use red high poly. Yeah, so red high poly shade flat, blue would be shade auto smooth. So I can take this, and you see I already have the mark sharp, right? So I can go to properties, and I'm going to change this to something like, I don't know, that, right? Say I want it like that. So hopefully now you can see. Yeah, perfect. This is what I wanted to show. When you bring it back on top, and pretend this is already perfectly lined up, right? You bring it back on top, you can see how well your cages match for the high and the low, and you don't have to use a separate material. This is a really nice method to use, so you don't have to make a new material for each like high-low object. You can just have one material, not have any extra duplicate materials just sitting around when you go to export, and you have your high and low visualization right here. And for example, if you needed the shade smooth for the low, you can see how well the high and low match. So if I were to go to the low, for example, and I'm trying to like get this to match the low, I believe, right? Yeah, blue. Okay, so say I was doing this, and I did GX, and it's like, huh, wow, that's kind of sticking out. That's too far. Well, I can just go here, GX, and I can see, oh cool, now it matches, right? So this is really nice without having to use two materials. So I hope you appreciate that trick. I know I really appreciate it when I found that out. But yeah, that is my video. I hope you enjoy. I hope you learned something. I hope modeling doesn't become a disaster for you now, and you actually understand the fundamentals of what the smoothing previews are actually doing, when to use which one. And if you want me to make another video, maybe a shorter video, something that was a little unclear, just let me know, and I will be happy to. So, like, subscribe, and I will see you for the next one.